All right, so my colleague Wendy Mitchell is going to do a conversation with, with Ita O'Brien, who is the UK's leading intimacy coordinator and founder of Intimacy on Set. Her company set up in 2018, and it provides services to TV, film, and theater when dealing with intimacy and sexual content and nudity. Ita pioneered the role of intimacy coordinator, and since 2014 has been developing best practices and on-the-set guidelines, which have been widely adopted in the industry and championed by the Time's Up movement. I just want to say something about Ita. I remember seeing Ita at Cannes, and you were coming around and you were like, Melissa, and you were like talking about intimacy, and I had literally no clue what you were talking about. So I am indebted to you for leading us on this journey. And basically there's a new industry now, a new job, and you have created it. So you are a pioneer.
Thank you.
Anne Choma is also joining us. She's the author of Gentleman Jack, The Real Anne Lister, the official companion book to the amazing 2019 BBC HBO drama Gentleman Jack. I believe we're getting a second season on that too. She first began reading and transcribing Lister's diaries in 1992, going on to do further research as a post-grad at the University of Leeds in 1994. In her capacity as lead consultant to Sally Wainwright, who is like top of the tier for me on the drama, Anne continues to play an important role in driving global attention to Lister's extraordinary life and work. And she was recently listed in the top 100 Pride Power list of 2020. Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for being here. I loved that show. I cannot wait for the second season. And Wendy, take it away.
Great.
Have a great conversation.
Thanks, Melissa, for introducing our guests. Yes, we're going to be looking at intimacy on screen in this talk. I'm thrilled to have Ita and Anne here. Melissa's already introduced them quite well, but just to mention some of Ita's recent shows are, gosh, this is the best of the year. I May Destroy You, Normal People, Sex Education, Watchmen. You'll see she's in a hotel room, isolating before doing a big shoot in Ireland, I believe.
That's right.
And yeah, you know, Anne Choma has been studying Anne Lister for more than 30 years. It's just amazing, her research. And I'd like to, you know, Ita, I love that, yeah, as we heard about intimacy coordination in Dorte's talk, in Karen's talk, and that goes to show that people are paying attention to this now. And I feel like I've read more articles about you this year than I've read about Brad Pitt. And isn't that wonderful? We don't need more articles on him. So yeah, it's been great to see the attention. But I wanted to start with Anne just telling us, some people might not have seen Gentleman Jack, so they might not really know who Anne Lister is. So could you give us a little primer for people who haven't heard of her yet, and why her diaries, all 24 volumes of them, are so unique? So welcome, Anne. You'll have to unmute yourself, or somebody will unmute you. Maybe?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Nice to meet you, Wendy. Hi, Ita.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing? Anne Lister was a Yorkshire woman, and she lived at Shibden Hall in West Yorkshire, Halifax. And she was a diarist. She was an industrialist. She developed her own coal pits on her land. She was an extensive traveller, but she's famous for her diaries. She wrote 27 volumes of diaries, around 5 million words. What makes her diaries extraordinary today is that they are written in the first person, and they give us an extraordinary account of a lesbian life lived in the early 19th century. So, and in 2011, the diaries were recognised by UNESCO as a pivotal document, and really a literary masterpiece. Gentleman Jack covers Anne's life, a section of Anne's life. And so the momentum has grown since Gentleman Jack about Anne's, Anne and her adventures amongst fans worldwide.
So how did Gentleman Jack, the TV show, did Sally Wainwright, who is just, as Melissa said, a sort of goddess of modern TV, did she come to you? Did you know her already? How did the show come about, and when were you involved in it?
Sally and I were friends. We had been friends for many years, and there's a long Anne Lister history of research prior to Gentleman Jack, with Helena Whitbread and Jill Liddington, significant historians in the Anne Lister story. And so we all knew each other, and I knew Sally around 2000. Sally kindly approached me at the beginning. The research had already begun on Gentleman Jack, and then she approached me to start transcribing the diaries for her. And eventually that morphed into me being Sally's advisor on set and consultant. So originally there was many years ago, there was a project to try and transcribe all of Anne's diaries, all 5 million words of them. And Sally was involved in that, I was involved in that, amongst other people. And so our friendship cemented at that point and just continued. And we both shared an obsessive love of Anne Lister and all things Anne Lister. So our friendship grew from that, and it seemed like a natural, we'd come full circle when Sally had started writing Gentleman Jack, that we started working together on that, and it's been, a wonderful collaboration.
Great. And I should mention that Sally sends her love to everybody at Carla, but she's traveling right now and couldn't actually take part physically, but wanted to very much supported the conversation. Because we're talking about intimacy, even if she wrote something about a lover in her diary, did she intend for the public to read that? She was being very open and about her sexuality?
Well, I mean, the diaries were written for, I believe the diaries were written for her and for nobody else. I mean, anything she didn't want anybody to see, she would write in a secret code. And anything that, that she felt might have been seen, or people might have read the diaries by taking a sneaky look at them, would have been written in codes that she wouldn't have revealed the most innermost thoughts to people. They were secreted within this strange alphabet that she'd constructed. So for me, the diaries have always been only written of Anne Lister and for her purpose. But yes, she did write with great sort of explicitness about her sexuality, and about many other things as well. So we get from Anne Lister's diaries a first-person account of what it was like to love women sexually in the early 19th century. And in fact, it will, as you come on to talk to Ita, we'll talk about that level of intimacy that she described in great detail. I mean, Anne Lister drew the original sexual body roadmap, I believe, for herself. She knew which bits of that roadmap to stop at and find pleasure in, and which bits weren't worth bothering about. So she was a liberated woman sexually.
Yeah, we should all be so lucky to do that today. When you're dealing with a historical person who is writing about their intimate moments in a code, is there any moral conundrum about then showing that on screen, for her descendants to see, if it wasn't something she was shouting about publicly, what right do modern people have to tell her story, including those intimate moments? How did you and Sally approach that?
I think, 200 years after the event, it's kind of fair game to be able to share this kind of amazing history with the world. So I think for me, when I was writing the book, I did kind of have a little bit of a dilemma in terms of what I included in it. And, in the introduction of the book the companion book that I wrote, there is a section there about, Anne pleasuring herself in a way that she normally wouldn't have pleasured herself. And I thought, should I include that? And I just thought, well, yeah, I really do need to include it. But, Sally and I certainly had again, we'll when we include Ita in the conversation in a minute, we had no qualms about sharing sexual content of Anne's life with the world, but we certainly wanted to do it tastefully, and you know, we didn't want it to be gratuitous, and it had to have context within the wider arc of the storytelling in the drama.
Yeah. And yeah, I will say, when you watch the show, it doesn't look like blue is the warmest color. In one example of maybe a problematic depiction of lesbianism on screen. So Ita, I would love to bring you in and just hear your thoughts on how you wanted to ensure that there was a sort of respectfulness about the intimacy that you showed. And, you know, for both of you, this isn't, the typical male gaze on lesbians, and how you sort of configured that with Sally and with Anne.
That's right. Well, you know, obviously I first spoke with Sally and with Anne and read the scripts, but most importantly, and through Anne, being shared, you know, with the whole gamut of different translations of the diaries. And then going from her language, you know, the words that she used, that the evocativeness of those words that absolutely gave you the physical qualities that was needed. And then also making sure, what was also so incredible about Anne Lister was that, you know, she was completely clear and had no question about who she was and what her sexuality was. And that's right from, you know, from a child. She just knew she knew herself, and then was uncompromising in how she presented herself in the world, knowing that it would mean that she'd get backlash. And that was some of the issues with the people that then, the other women that she was in relationship with that embraced the relationship with her. But then, you know, then it came to the question of, then will you stand up and stand next to me, presenting yourself in society, you know, with that honesty. And that's where then sort of many of the women couldn't do that. They needed to actually get married and continue that conventional life. So that was part of, or a big part in just really honouring Anne Lister's energy, her, you know, and her love of life, her love of women, and then taking that all into the intimate content.
And specifically with this show, working with the actresses, can you talk about, you know, were there any especially tricky scenes or moments that you really wanted to ensure everybody felt safe and supported, and how did you do that?
We had an initial day before everybody went up to Yorkshire in London, where all the actresses who are going to be playing any of the intimate content, and Sally and Anne and myself and the director of the second block, having that conversation and laying out not just what the intimate content was, but how we were going to work. And also, wasn't it Anne, just really saying about how important it was that we were honouring the queer community and saying, you know, has this happened before? A room of women honouring a woman of history, writing so beautifully about, you know, her sexual expression of her loving, and then making sure that we honoured that. So I feel, and then we took that into each of the scenes. So I feel that day and that conversation and setting up that focus and looking at the details of Anne Lister's diaries, and as I said, the words like, you know, she had this thing about suppressing into someone and grubbling, and there were words like that that were so evocative, and then we could take into how we express that physically.
And I was thinking, Ita, that day, you know, when we were all in that room together, it was a really liberating, empowering day for us, wasn't it? For everybody involved. Just because, I mean, it was a room full of women talking about sex, and, you know, it just felt a very strong moment in the production, in pre-production of Gentleman Jack, that we were able to do that. And it just felt incredibly empowering. And I kind of remember the bit before that, where you and I the day before were sat in the park in Soho Square Gardens with the lesbian Kama Sutra book on our knee, looking, and you had the scripts with you, and we were going through each of the scenes, Ita, of the where sex was happening within Gentleman Jack, and you know, discussing how we felt they should be played out. And I think we took some of that to the meeting as well the next day, with Saran and Sophie and Lydia. So yeah, it was a really, really special day that we were able to do that.
And this might be a really dumb question, but I'm curious, in the early 1800s, was sex different? Was intimacy different? I mean, did you take a sort of historical, factual approach about what undergarments might have been ripped off in a certain way, or even just, sexual acts where they didn't have, porn on YouTube or anything to be watching? So was sex different, Anne?
Not really. I mean, it's all about giving pleasure, isn't it? And understanding your partner and knowing what your partner likes. So Anne Lister was very good at taking the lead, and she was quite dominant as a lover in terms of wanting to make sure that her women had as much pleasure and as many what she would describe as kisses as possible. But it's interesting you mentioned the word porn, because, Anne Lister used to read, I was thinking I can just give you an example. Anne Lister would read Marshall's epigrams to Mariana Lawton, and that was kind of their version of porn. She would source her titillation from the classics.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of level of historic detail that really, really brings everything to life in terms of how it was for them at that point in time, as women loving women.
Yeah. And we've talked about this a little bit, and I wanted to mention that in block 4 today, we're going to be talking specifically about the queer gaze. But, do you feel a special responsibility for either of you and how, homosexual relations are displayed on screen compared to heterosexual, and especially a female gaze on two women? Can you talk a little bit about that, and just not perpetuating stereotypes, what we might think of as lesbians, how they have sex, and things like that?
Anne, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, as a gay woman myself, it's incredibly important to be able to see reality, depicted on TV. And one of the comments that came after, the series had transmitted from gay women around the world, that it was for the first time they felt represented in the way that the sex was portrayed, and how it was different from what they'd seen on mainstream TV before. So that was massive, and we did want to, it was, we talked about this, Ita, and we talked about it with Sally, that we wanted to be able to do justice for the LGBTQI community, and to give them something that they would remember as being a positive experience by seeing the sex on screen. So it was hugely important for us to get that right, and we were very sensitive to all of that.
Yeah, likewise. That's absolutely, my work is, or the development of the intimacy guidelines is absolutely, from my journey as a musical theatre dancer, but then an actor myself, and absolutely, all the intimate content is about taking that storytelling into the physical, when that intimacy, that frisson journeys through from text, then releasing into the physical, and it's about telling storytelling through the physical intimacy. And for me, it was really important that we really honoured the queer community, that we got that journey right. And for me, the real shift of it comes from, with the queer female lovemaking, from emotion, from relationship, from connection, from that heart place, through into that intimate connection. And that was as much as important as physically what they actually did, was really, that whole energy and the connection of those relationships through into the intimate content.
Yeah, and this intimate content is very clearly not just put there to titillate. It's there because it's part of the story.
Yeah.
And with that note, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of your other shows, Ita. We'll come back with Anne, and I should mention we're going to be taking audience questions. In about 10 minutes, questions are open now. So if you want to type it into YouTube down in the comments, go for it. We would love to have some questions, and I'm sure you're going to have some questions. But yeah, I think, Normal People is another, amazing show. And a lot of people are talking about it. And this, I think for Connell and Marianne, sex is a huge part of their relationship. And that was a huge part of their relationship in the book that Sally Rooney amazingly wrote. And it's a big part of the show. So, you know, working with normal people, can you talk about maybe the specific challenges of that? Because there is a lot of sex and a lot of nudity, but it's, again, it's not, you know, pornographic. It's not there extraneously. So could you talk about normal people for a minute?
Well, that's right. Well, my sense is the difference with normal people, in a way the same as with Anne Lister, that it comes from such a fantastic narrative and that substance and that beauty of Sally Rooney's writing. And equally, the way Sally Rooney writes, the detail that she gives and she brings into the descriptions of the intimate content. And then, you know, she herself is, you know, that's her intention with writing. You see something about that body, mind, spirit connection that these two people have with each other through you know, through that intimate content that then perhaps they're not quite able to match in how they speak with each other, you know, when they're concerned about their emotions, and then how they relate sort of with their dialogue. And so all of us were, you know, really, I can say university, were in love with the book, and then were so aware of how inherently all the intimate content was absolutely integral to that ongoing storytelling, telling us something other about them that they couldn't bring in their, you know, when they were speaking to each other. And so all of us just set about making sure that was honoured, and then through the guidelines, or through working with the intimacy coordination, then again, it means there's a professional structure, a process that really invites that agreement and consent, so that with all of us, Lenny's empowered as a director, his vision's listened to, we're all honouring Sally's writing, and then with that clear professional process, then really working openly with Daisy and Paul for them to be autonomous, empowered, being able to say really clearly, most importantly, what they're not happy with, so we can all work really freely with every word that they're comfortable with. And then that's what you see, creating free storytelling that really, you know, honors the you know, the narrative of these two characters.
And I'm just thinking back, you know, there's a lot of nudity. You know, we saw a lot of Daisy's body. We probably didn't see as much of Paul's body. You know, it seems to me we still have this imbalance that it's okay to show a woman's breasts 1,000 times and we don't see a penis on BBC One at a certain hour. How did you juggle the amount of nudity, and why was it important for her to be bare-breasted, to show this level of intimacy, I guess?
Well, first of all, I'd like to actually say that I actually think, particularly in this production, there was real focus on having parity of nudity. And actually, there were several times that that you see, you know, the character of Connell completely naked. There's a couple of times post-coital where he's just leaning on her, you know, one about, I think it's episode 6, and one again in episode 12, where he's just the naked body, flaccid penis, but really important to see that the male in repose. And then there's another time he's come out of the shower. And again, we really spoke to that with Lenny and Susie Lavelle, the most amazing and beautiful cinematographer. Their palette was to use the images of Nan Goldin and the color palette of Nan Goldin, and also the quality of her images, which is just that dropped, open, natural and normal presence with your lover in that degree of nudity. And that's what we look to capture. So it's interesting that you felt there wasn't that parity, because I really can tell you that, you know, I feel that that was a focus of the production and a focus from Lenny to say, let's have equal masculine and feminine nudity.
I'm glad you pointed that out. I had friends who were joking that they saw more of Daisy's boobs than they saw of, you know, anything else this summer. So I think I'm probably misremembering it. So I'm really glad. I do remember seeing his male body more than we usually see a male body. So thank you for that.
And you know, and then for you know, as I said, we put in place what are you comfortable with? Where's your yeses, but where's your no's? Daisy, you know, each person, and this is what's so important about the aspect of the intimacy guidelines, is we put in place that the structure and the process that asks for agreement and consent, and that's of touch, of simulated sexual content, and of nudity. and everybody has a different relationship with their body. Again, shifting the narrative in the industry to say just because someone perhaps is not comfortable to be fully naked does not mean that they're not a brilliant actor, and they're not indeed the best actor for that job. And then the converse has happened. If someone is comfortable with their nudity, with their physicality, with their nakedness, then there's a that actress is able to work openly, professionally with that degree of nudity that's required. If it wasn't comfortable, it wasn't within her agreement and consent, then we would absolutely have worked in order to do the shots that that respected that, and that's what we did in other aspects. I tell you that the shots that. The times I would say, they were saying, don't want to take, not necessarily Paul and Daisy, but other characters in the production, don't want to take, I want to keep my flesh-coloured shorts on throughout. I promise you would have thought that those scenes that both actors were completely naked. But again, it's about honouring their, what their agreement and consent, and then working creatively with the camera angles with our amazing cinematographer.
Yeah, and I should say, I mean, it very much, I never thought it was gratuitous. It wasn't like, hey, if it was a story about a young law student trying to finish her exams, yeah, maybe you don't need to see the boobs so much. But this is a story of two young people very much falling deeply in love, and part of that is their physical relationship. So I get it. I didn't mean to be flippant about
Yeah, no, and I get that, but then it's interesting, isn't it, how I suppose it is our society with a naked breast. For a man, he could be naked from the waist up, and that's just considered fine and normal, and there's no issue. But for a woman to be naked from the waist up, which means being naked breasted, again, there's a certain taboo about that. There's a taboo about the female nipple. I think there's one point in the watershed that you can show a male naked nipple, obviously if a man's been naked from the waist up, but not a female, and So I think that's also interesting within our society, our comfortableness, our relationship with female nudity, and I also, particularly from all the conversations we're having today, it goes with when it's been exploited, when it's been objectified or titivated, and not just there as just honouring the female or the male form.
I will be remiss if we don't talk about another. I mean, gosh. I don't know which is better, but we don't have to, they can both be equally top show of 2020. I May Destroy You with Michaela Coel. Again, a lot of intimate scenes, a lot of nudity. And there's one scene, just before we take the audience questions, I have to ask about, because it was so powerful to me. And I have to say, every period I've had since I've watched this scene, it sort of feels empowering. I think back, like Michaela Coel has this thing too, which is the scene that she's about to have sex. She's got a tampon in, she's menstruating, there's blood. Yeah, what was it like working on that scene with her? And I guess that was driven by Michaela's own idea that she wanted to show that.
So yes, it's Michaela's writing, and it's, what she included within the narrative. It tells you something more about, Annabella and Biagio. And I was delighted when I read it. It's like, wow, this is just fantastic. And of course, I didn't have to talk Michaela through it, she'd written it. But when I spoke the actor, the beautiful Mawan, through the beats of that scene, and because it starts, first of all, with she's wearing a tampon and a pad. And the actor's going, really, does this happen? Is this what women do? And I'm going, yes, if someone's got a strong flow. And so that detail, it was very exciting to have that detail in there, and to not shy away from it. And also what was so important for me in Michaela's writing was the response of the male character, that he wasn't in disgust. He actually was a reverse. He was curious and a sense of beauty, and that was so important. And I just think it needs to be shown. As I said, half the world's population spend roughly 40 years of their life engaged in menstruating, 12 weeks a year. Roughly 480 weeks of half the population's life is engaged in our paraphernalia of menstruating, and yet when do we see it? When do we normalize it? So I was honoured and delighted to have worked with Michaela, but that scene in particular was just superb.
Yeah, she is such a powerhouse. And if anybody out there hasn't seen I May Destroy You yet, it's just magnificent. I would love to take a few of the audience questions, because we've got some great ones coming in. The first is for Ita, just how did you start in this business? Because I think your background is acting and movement, and how did you become one of the first intimacy coordinators?
I truly feel I was just guided and blessed, and you know, it was an organic journey. I've danced. My mum was Irish. Well, I'm from an Irish Catholic background. My mum wanted me to do Irish dancing. There wasn't any, so I went to ballet. I trained as a ballet dancer into musical theatre. Had a 10-year career. Trained as an actor, 8-year career there. Did the MA in movement studies at Central School of Speech and Drama, working as a movement teacher, movement director, and then I started creating and writing my own work. Put on my own play, and then I was taking that step further, devising a piece around the dynamic of abuse in our society. And in that process, I was looking at what practices and principles do I need to put in place to make this work in a present, open, conscious way with best practice with my actors. And that ended up developing into the guidelines. And then when Weinstein, when the Me Too and Time's Up movement happened, I'd already developed the process of the intimacy on set guidelines, and I was there ready to go. Look, here is now how we work with professionalism, with autonomy, with best practice, with the intimate content, putting in place respect for all.
And can people access those guidelines from your website, or are they sort of private, or
No,
where?
Absolutely, they're deliberately there out in the world. And I'm journeying through getting them translated as well. There's a few different translations, including Swedish and Spanish, but I'm gradually working through. So it's on the Intimacy on Set website. And if you go to the page that's Intimacy on Set Guidelines, please take them, read them, print them out. You know, I say to actors or directors, don't just say they're there, take them, read them, and yes, and then work through them. And it just gives that guide to allowing everybody, as I say, just that shift where there wasn't an idea of needing to have a professional structure, and indeed the idea that actually it's we need professional skills. It is a body dance. There are two people moving together in a rhythm, just like a choreographer. We're bringing that sense of choreography, where to hold, you know, so that we can be detailed and precise and really honoring the storytelling.
Yeah, thank you. So Intimacy on Set website, you can find those guidelines.
Yeah.
And there's another question that's come through, sort of what more, other than sort of looking at these guidelines, trying to implement them on your own productions, what more can we do to protect actresses, actors too? It's not just women who can feel uncomfortable and feel unsafe. You know, we heard Dorte speaking very passionately about what she had experienced, and I'm sure a lot of that still goes on. What can we do? What more can we do?
So I'm really glad you said that. I feel the last big Me Too is all that the young men, older men who equally have been harassed and abused and really seriously have long-term ripple effects of that abuse. The two most vulnerable people that I have come to my workshop were two middle-aged men who had experienced abuses in their 20s, and that was still affecting them. So, the overall tenets of the guidelines is, first of all, open communication and transparency. Yeah, so everybody, producers, directors, actors, right from the get-go, if there's intimate content there, talk about it. I say to directors, before the audition stage, consider what you want. Things can shift and change, but be prepared to have that open conversation, and then putting in place that structure of agreement and consent. Yes, no assumptions, and invite the positive no. Yes, invite your actors no, so that we can all work freely and professionally with the yes. And then just to know, you know, to bring a structure to the intimate content, choreograph it clearly, which then allows your actors to be free to really bring all of their skills as an actor to the intimate content, giving you the best work possible.
Great, and a question coming in for Anne, just about the queer gaze. And this is, you don't have to speak on behalf of the whole queer community, but yeah, what would you like to see representation of LGBTQIA people evolve on screen?
Well, I think it's, you know, in terms of like working with Ita, it's all about transparency, isn't it? And today we're so much more open about sex and the way we talk about sex. And I think it's about honouring, certainly for Anne Lister, it was honouring her life in the most truthful and honest way we could. She was a lesbian living in the early 19th century, and we wanted to do justice to her. And so that was the premise that we went by for Gentleman Jack. But I think we just need to do more of the same, and we need to be able to talk about sex, to be free about how we feel about our own bodies, and to represent communities in the way that they want to be represented on TV and on mainstream TV. And I think going forward for series 2, that's certainly what we'll be doing. And you know, it's a great plus for us that from Gentleman Jack we got so much positivity from it, and that was because we had these free conversations about sex and about what people felt comfortable with. And I think that's what came through Sally, through Saran's, and through Sophie's performance, and the intimacy they enjoyed with each other, and with Lydia Leonard, who played Mariana Lawton, and how we depicted those intimate scenes. And they spoke to those scenes spoke to lesbians around the world. I could say that it was all because it was women involved. I mean, you know, we had Ita, we had Sally directing, we had, you know, obviously women playing women, lesbians. I was the female consultant on set who happened to be a lesbian. So all these things have a huge impact in the way something is going to be, how something is going to look in the final cut. But I think, yes, I mean, that's how I feel about it, and I hope it continues to be like that for future series, and for any show, any film, any drama that has LGBTQ characters in it.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really wonderful point to end on, and I think I'm hearing from both of you. You know, one of the most important things is listening.
Yeah.
You know, listening to the people who are making the production, listening to the communities that you're representing, listening in a personal way, in a professional way. So really, thank you for the work you're doing, the shows you've created, just amazing work. So I do encourage anybody who hasn't seen I May Destroy You, Normal People, of course, Gentleman Jack. We have to go back and watch that to be ready for season 2. When will season 2 be made? Maybe, well, gosh, it's hard to predict production right now, isn't it?
It is. We're hoping to start filming, you know, in a few months' time.
Okay.
All being well, COVID, you know.
Yeah,
it's COVID, of course, but yeah, we're hoping.
Screens maybe next year
Mm.
or so. Best of luck with it, and thank you so much for joining us to talk about intimacy on screen. Yeah, again, thank you for your pioneering work, both of you, and I'm going to hand back over. Hello, New York.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now it's getting to be a decent hour here. Thank you, Ita, Anne, and Wendy, for such a great conversation. I mean, Ita, you are pioneering the world that we are all living in now. This is the present, the future, and vitally important. And so just thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
Melissa, as you said, from meeting you in 2018, wasn't it, at Cannes, thank you also for your pioneering and the support of Time's Up UK and Time's Up in America. So you have been so instigatory and in supporting the work. So thank you as well.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Stay safe in that hotel room until you go on to the show that you're waiting for. What show is it?
Oh, I can't say.
Oh, busted. Okay. Well, you'll let us know when we can know. So, everybody, what is happening next is that you're going to watch a conversation that I had earlier this week with Tori Amos, the singer-songwriter, on demand. And so that is a link in your YouTube. You should watch that now, and then come back here at the top of the hour, and Victoria Thomas will be guiding you through Block 3. So thank you for staying with me for Block 2, and being your hostess and moderator, and I will see you all later in the day. Thank you very much.
See you later. And lovely